Om
सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं कर्वावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। Om Tanmayi, could you please chant verse number 11 to 14? Mantra number 11 to 14.
Yeah, we're almost at the end.
Yes, I don't think we'll complete the whole thing today. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Tai yogamiti manyante.
Yogamiti Manyante
Sthiram indriya dharanam.
Sthiram Indriya Dharanam
Apramattastada bhavati.
Apramattastada Bhavati
Yogo hi prabhavapyayo.
Yogo Hi Prabhavapyaya
Naiva vacha na manasa.
Naiva Vachana Manasa
Praptum shakyo na chakshusha.
Praptum Shakyo Chakshusha
Astiti bruvatoonyatra.
Astiti Pruvatonyaka
Kathan tadupalabhyate.
Katham Tadupalabhyate
Astitevopalabdhavyaha.
Astitevopalabhavya
Tattvabhavena chobhayoho.
Bhavena Chobhayoho
Astitevopalabdhasya.
Astitevopalabhasya
Tattvabhavah prasidati.
Tattvabhavah prasidati
Yada sarve pramucyante.
Yada sarve pramucyante
Kama yesya hridishritaha.
Kama yesya hridishitaha
Athamartyo mrito bhavati.
Athamartyo mrito bhavati
Atra brahma samashnute.
Atra Brahma Samashnute. Okay. So, let's look at the words. Manyante. So, here you have to add te manyante. Those people consider tam indriya dharanam sthiram. Tam is indriya dharanam sthiram. Indriya sthiram dharanam. The sense organs are steady. There's a steady poise in the sense organs. They are not wandering here and there. And this sthiram indriyanam iti yogam manyante. They consider that to be yoga. So this is one of the definitions of yoga which is seen in the Upanishads. So he's saying the steadiness of your sense organs, the ability of the sense organs and the mind to be controlled, to not wander, that is yoga. And apramata bhavati. So pramada is carelessness. Apramada means to be alert, to be not careless. One should be alert. Apramata bhavati. Tada, at that time. At what time? At the time that you are controlling your sense organs. And why is that so? Yoga hi prabhava apyayo. So prabhava and apyayo. That is, prabhava means rising, apyayo means falling. He says you have to be very careful in this pose because yoga is subject to rise and fall. It comes and goes. Right? So whenever we read this mantra, which verses of Bhagavad Gita are to be correlated? Shastram is not studied in isolation, right? The entire thing is one integrated whole. So what is he saying? See what he has said, and then tell me which are the verses of Lord Krishna that are to be taken into account.
The 6th chapter.
6th chapter, right? Because 6th chapter talks about meditation. He is also talking about meditation. And therefore he says, Yogam iti manyante. This is said to be yoga. What are we talking about here? If you have been following the last few mantras, we are talking about Nidhi Dhyasanam, which Krishna calls Dhyana Yoga in chapter 6. So, Yogam iti manyante, that Nidhi Dhyasanam, that Dhyana Yoga is called yoga by Lord Krishna. And by Yamraj also, it is called yoga. Another name for Nidhi Dhyasanam is Jnana Samadhi. So Jnana Samadhi is different from the Samadhi of Yoga Sutras. In fact, some of the authors, some of the commentators who have been contrasting these two Samadhis, they talk of the Samadhi of the Yoga Sutras as Andha Samadhi, as blind Samadhi. Why is the Samadhi of the Yoga Sutra yogi called Andha Samadhi? Because he is in Advaita Avastha, no doubt. You know what I mean, right? When I say that the person who is in Ashtanga Samadhi is in Advaita Avastha, what does it mean?
The Triputi is at that point in time resolved.
The Triputi is resolved. There is no Dvaitam, and therefore is in Advaita Avastha. But remember, he does not have Advaita Jnanam. Why does he not have Advaita Jnanam? Because in the entire Yoga Sutra, those 8 Ashtanga, we don't talk about Jnanam at all. They are simply practice. And that is why, while we Vedantis accept those Ashtangas as very important for Chitta Shuddhi, we don't accept the Ashtangas as an instrument of knowledge, because there is no knowledge involved. That is why it is called Andha Samadhi, because Advaita Avastha is definitely there. There is no Triputi, but he has no Advaita Jnana. And what is the proof? Because Yoga Sutra is a clean dualistic philosophy. It talks about a separate Purusha and a separate Prakriti. There is no Advaitam at all. And therefore he says, Shankara says in his commentary, Etasyam hi avasthayam. In this state of Nidhi Dhyasanam, which we call Jnana Samadhi, what is the speciality? He says, Avidya Adhyaropena Varjita Swarupa. You can follow? He is free from Adhyaropa, all superimpositions which are caused by Avidya. So, Avidya Adhyaropa Varjita Swarupa. Free from all superimpositions caused by Avidya. What are the superimpositions caused by Avidya?
You believe
Anatma,
Beg your pardon?
Anatma superimposed on Atma.
Can you just, expand on that a bit?
Attributes of Anatma superimposed on Atma. It's like I am doing, so doesn't mean that BMS is doing.
So, yes, what you are saying is correct, but we can simply say that the Adhyaropa is the Panchakoshas. 3 bodies of Panchakoshas. So, in this Jnana Samadhi, he is free from the Panchakoshas. Right? What is the difference, therefore, between this Jnana Samadhi called Nidhi Dhyasanam and Sushupti Avastha or even Yogic Samadhi? There's a very clear difference which he is pointing out. Avidya adhyaropena varjitam. He is free from the panchakoshas in jnana samadhi. How? By not physically, but by negating them as himself. While in sushupti avastha, the panchakoshas have not been removed. They are dormant. The avidya adhyaropa in sushupti avastha, as well as in the yogic samadhi, which we call andha samadhi, they are only dormant, and that is why they come back when the person comes out of samadhi. Right? So, if you take the rope snake example, the rope snake goes away how? By knowing that the snake is a rope. And the knowledge that the snake is not a snake, but the snake is a rope, that is involving jnanam, not samadhi. Right? And therefore, this andha samadhi gentleman, this yogi who goes into samadhi, he may go into nirvikalpa samadhi also. And during nirvikalpa samadhi, there will be no thoughts about the snake. Right? Because there are no thoughts. But when you come out of samadhi, what will happen? The snake is very much there. The snake has not gone away. And this is what Yamaraj is saying. During meditation during nididhyasanam, if it is andha samadhi or sushupti avastha, where the mind is resolved, it is only a temporary resolution. It is not a permanent solution. Avidya adhyaropa has not been removed, has only been temporarily resolved. And further, we have to note that he says, apramata tada. Why is Yamaraj saying, be very alert? It's a warning that during meditation, distractions are bound to happen. What is the verse of the Bhagavad Gita, of the 6th chapter specifically, where Krishna says the same thing? The distractions will happen. Where does he say that?
When Arjuna says that the mind is very fickle and it runs away, he answers after that.
What is the answer?
That with the abhyasa and vairagya, one can get
Yatho yatho nischarati manas chanchalam. That is a verse. That wherever the mind goes, please bring it back and therefore be alert. Right? So during meditation, the main thing which is being said here is that you have to be alert. And you will find that what you are trying to negate, they will always be there in your mind. Your parent role, your daughter role, your son role, your businessman role, your sadhaka role, all will be there. But remember that whenever I am in meditation, ahankara should be diluted. Because the ahankara is not ego over here, not the dharmashastra ahankara. Ahankara is the sthula sukshma shariram plus the OC, plus the consciousness. So that ahankara has to be invoked for all worldly transactions. And therefore, when I am invoking higher nature in this nididhyasanam, that it is natural that ahankara will be there and the worries of your daily life will intrude into your meditation. And Yamaraj is saying that this is natural. Don't worry about it. Let it go. Every time the worry comes, let it go. That is what Krishna also said in chapter 6. Every time it comes, bring the mind back to yourself. And therefore, worries will come. You ignore the worries, ignore that thought, bring your mind back to your real nature. Right? And hence, remaining without distraction in nididhyasanam, he says, that is called yoga. That's why he says, tam sthiram indriya dharanam iti yogam. Remaining in an undistracted state during the practice of nididhyasanam, that is called yoga. And tada, therefore, tada refers to what? At the nididhyasana kale. During the time that I am practicing nididhyasanam, apramata bhava. Be alert. Why should you be alert? Yogaha prabhavaha apyayav. Because concentration will appear and disappear, will be subject to coming and going. This is natural. Therefore, one should be alert. Very, very, practical approach to how to do Nididhyasana. Because most of us, when we get distracted, we tend to blame ourselves that our concentration is not strong enough. I have not practiced enough. Yamaraj is saying you shouldn't be trying to judge yourself because you are not the one who has created the character of the wandering mind. Wandering mind is by your very nature. Therefore, all you need is to ensure that you should be alert. Every time a distraction comes, recognize the distraction, don't nourish it, and bring your mind back to your original nature. Aham Brahmasmi. That thought should prevail. Okay. Now we look at the 12th mantra. So he says, Shakyam Praptum. You have to supply Brahman. Brahman can be grasped. Shakyam Praptum can be understood. How? Na chakshusha, not through the eyes. Na vacha, not through speech. Na manasa, not through mind. Then, katham tat. So having said that, naiva vacha na manasa na chakshusha praptum shakya. First line is saying that Brahman cannot be understood by using your eyes or through your speech or through your mind. And then the last quarter is katham tat upalabhyate. How then can that Brahman be known? So, anyatra, by anybody else, other than the one who says, Bruvatoho iti asti. So that breakup is important. Katham tat upalabhyate is the question. How then can Brahman be known? This is to be connected to the first line. If it cannot be known through these various pramanam, how then can Brahman be known? And then anyatra. So that is saying that by anybody else other than the person who says Bruvata, who says iti asti, Brahman exists. Okay. So what quality of a seeker, of a sadhaka, is Yamaraj referring to?
Anunishta.
Sorry?
Anunishta.
No.
Shraddha.
Shraddha. Why Shraddha?
Okay. Because you have to believe in the existence of Brahman and that I am Brahman, even if it's
Yes. So that is the topic of this particular discussion. Very good. So Yamaraj is highlighting a very important virtue, Shraddha in Veda Pramana. The acceptance of the words of the Veda as true, even though provisionally, that is called Shraddha. And ultimately, when I say I believe in the words of the Veda, the primary teaching of the Veda is what? You are Brahman. Right? That is the primary. Tattvamasi is the primary teaching of the Upanishads. Now, if I have to believe that I am Brahman, first I must accept that something called Brahman exists. And that's what he means by Asti Iti. This Brahman exists. That is the starting point of your spiritual journey. So Upanishads will, through systematic teaching over a long period of time under a competent teacher and all that, it will teach you that Brahman is nobody other than yourself. And that is important because why do you say yourself? Because nobody doubts his own existence. And therefore you do not need any Veda Pramanam, any Pramanam at all to know that you exist. But you need a Pramanam to know that Brahman exists. Only if you accept that Brahman exists, then only can at a later stage you accept that Brahman which exists is none other than I who also exists. So Aham Brahmasmi. You start with Brahma Asti, that is Brahman exists, and end up with Brahma Asmi. So you start with Brahma Asti, Brahman exists, and you end up with I am Brahman. The acceptance of this fact that Brahman exists. Remember, there is no possible way of proving that by any Brahmanam at all. Therefore, the acceptance of Brahman exists, which is Asti Iti. Very simple little word, Asti Iti. Brahman exists. This acceptance is called Shraddha, faith in the validity of the Veda. And therefore, when I study systematically, I will slowly move from Brahman Asti to Brahman Asmi. And this understanding is called Shraddha. Study, and that Shraddha which you have, that will get converted into Jnanam. And that is why Krishna said, Shraddhavan labhate Jnanam. Only the one who has got Shraddha, he will get knowledge. That verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Shraddhavan labhate Jnanam, is also borrowed from Kathopanishad. So he says, Brahma praptum na shakyaha. Brahman cannot be known through any of the instruments of knowledge, like the eyes or the speech. Okay? Now, speech here, when you say vacha, speech, it represents all the texts. Okay, books can only talk about Brahman; they cannot reveal Brahman. And chakshusha represents all the sense organs, and of course, asti iti bruvataha. It means shraddhava, the one who believes that Brahman is. And this faith that Brahman exists is based on what? Is based on Veda's declaration that Brahman exists. And that faith, it is a, faith, a temporary faith, which will then get converted into Jnana, a provisional faith, you can call it, until it gets proved otherwise. It gets proved wrong or it gets proved right. But you start with that temporary faith that Brahman exists. And then Shankara adds over here, iti avagatatvat, knowing from Shastram that this Brahman is Jagat Moolam, is the Jagat Karanam, cause of the universe. Therefore, Asti Eva, Brahman does definitely exist. This is the first step. And Shankara gives a logical explanation also. So he says, whenever a product, a karyam, is resolved into the karanam. For example, the gold necklace resolves into the gold. What happens? What is the process? The process is that the existence of the necklace. So it's a very important, prakriya. He says, the existence part of the necklace, isness of the necklace, because the necklace ceases to exist. How? You melt it, for example. So the necklace ceases to exist, the name and form is gone. The Nama Rupa goes back into potential form. But this necklace consists of two things, not Nama Rupa alone. It consists also of the existence, in this case the gold. And he says, therefore, while the Nama Rupa is temporarily resolved, the isness, the existence goes back into the gold. Okay, similarly, one has to use this example to imagine. Yamraj says it in one little, statement, but if you have to look at the understanding, we have to take it step by step. Let us try to imagine the resolution of the whole universe. Okay, at the pralayam time, let us say. What is the first step during pralayam? All the sukshma bhutani, all the gross elements, they will go back, they will resolve into the subtle elements. The first step. Now, what is the least subtle of the subtle elements? Among subtle elements also, there is a degree of subtlety, right? What is the grossest of the 5 subtle elements?
Earth, Prithvi.
Prithvi. So then you have to imagine the prakriya, the process. The Prithvi, that is the subtle Prithvi, resolves into the subtle jalam, subtle water. And now subtle Prithvi is gone because subtle jalam remains. This subtle water, the jalam, it in turn resolves into subtle Agni, subtle fire. The subtle Agni resolves into subtle Vayu. Subtle Vayu resolves into subtle Akasha. And the subtle Akasha resolves into Avyaktam, also called Maya. Therefore, the process of Pralayam, the entire universe resolves in different stages, in several stages, from the gross elements to finally get into Maya, Avyakta Maya. At that Avyakta Maya stage, you have reached where? You have finally reached Saguna Ishvara. And this process has a particular name in Shastra. I think we have discussed it before also. It's called Pravilapanam, the resolution. The whole universe resolves into Brahman, but not directly. It travels through several intermediary causes, karanams, before reaching Saguna Ishvara. Saguna Ishvara is Ishvara with form, who is the final karanam for the world. And what Shankara is saying here is that Shankara is making a very important observation. Every karanam, every cause has got two components, existence and namarupa, right? Existence is there and name and form is there. Now he says that when in this pravilapanam process, any karyam resolves into the karanam, only the nama rupa disappears. That is a very important point. Whenever a product or a karyam resolves into the karanam, only the name and form disappears, but the existence of the karyam, it gets transferred to the karanam. Am I making sense? Just as when the necklace, the gold necklace is resolved, is melted down, the nama rupa, the name and the form disappears, but the existence of the necklace, where is it now found? It is found in the gold. And in this process of pravilapanam, where we are saying that at each stage, for example, subtle Prithvi disappears into subtle water goes into subtle Agni. At each stage, this thing happens. This process, this event happens that the Nama Rupa disappears and the existence gets transferred back to the Karanam. And Shankara uses this particular logic, that this is to point out that this is the logical proof that Brahman exists. How can you say that? Because he says anugamyamanam. So anugamyamanam means following this whole process of pravilapanam, following the process of one cause or one product disappearing into the cause, and then that now being a product disappearing into its cause. He says at every stage, existence goes nowhere. Existence is just transferred to the Karanam. And therefore, when this Jagat, when this universe finally disappears completely, the existence of the universe has been transferred in steps to the final cause, which is Saguna Ishvara. Saguna Ishvara has Brahman as a component. And therefore, it has to be understood very carefully. So he says, he also adds one more very important step, that at each stage of this resolution, each later Karanam is more subtle than the earlier Karanam. That we saw in Tattvabodha, that Prithvi is grosser than Jalam. Jalam is grosser than Agni. Agni is grosser than all that we saw, right? So therefore, each success, each earlier karanam in the process. So it's called parampara, the lineage, the ladder. So each higher step in the ladder is less subtle than the lower step. So all the karanams are therefore in a ascending order of subtlety. This is very, very important, this observation, that each karanam is more subtle than the earlier karanam. Why? Because sooner or later, as the karanam gets more and more subtle, pratyaksham or observation will fail. And once observation fails, further conclusions cannot be based on pratyaksham, on observation, but has to be based on anumanam only, inference only. And when you come to the ultimate cause, Saguna Ishvara, it can be only through this process of anumanam, inference. Then what is the logic for that inference? Every intermediary cause, karanam, in the ladder has had existence, because simply the existence of the product has been transferred to it. And therefore, every intermediate cause has had an existence. And hence, the final cause also must have an existence. The final cause is Saguna Brahman, or Saguna Brahman, Brahman you can say. Therefore, Brahman must have existence. Does it make sense?
Acharya, you've got a whole bunch of people who have no doubt about the existence of Brahman. So, you know.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to point out the logical argument. We are saying that everything which moves, which resolves, the name and form is resolved, but the existence transferred. The only thing which remains constant by virtue of this transfer is the existence. And therefore, there can be no doubt that Brahman has existence. And that is why when you say Brahman is asti iti, when you say that, you may start out that it's Shraddha, but ultimately it is logical. And therefore, throughout the process, existence persists. Right? And here you have to note that one more very important point he makes, a very, very important point. He says that whenever any product is resolved, so he says, yadapi vishaya pravilapanena, whenever an object, any product, any karyam is resolved, pravilapyamana buddhihi also gets resolved, which means that whenever any product is resolved, the awareness of that product also gets resolved. Let me explain. You are looking at a pot outside you, in front of your eyes. One pot. How many pots are there in the process? You are seeing the pot.
One outside and one inside the mind.
One outside and one inside the mind in the form of pot knowledge. The form of the pot is present in your mind. If you remember how we talked about how knowledge takes place, epistemology part of it, the mind flows out, envelops, the vritti flows out, envelops the pot, and at the same time Chaitanya envelops the pot because Chaitanya is present in the vritti, and therefore there is a pot outside you. It is known to you because that pot knowledge is present inside you. And for a pot to be cognized, both need to be there. The pot outside you has to be there. The pot thought, the pot knowledge has to be there inside you. Both need to be present. When the pot is destroyed or the pot goes away, Shankara says the pot awareness, the pot knowledge, the pot thought also goes away. Right? But remember that whether it is the pot which has gone or whether it is the pot knowledge which has gone, what has gone is only the Nama Rupa in both these entities. Both these entities, the pot and the pot knowledge, they have two components, Nama Rupa plus Sat, existence. When pot is broken, a pot goes away, Nama Rupa goes away, pot existence remains. When the pot thought goes away, the Nama Rupa, which is the vritti, the pot thought is the Nama Rupa, that goes away. But the existence which pervades the vritti, that does not go away. So he says, even when the pot goes away and the pot knowledge goes away, it is only the names and forms which are going away. The existence is continued. Existence goes nowhere, and that is the pramanam, he says, for the existence of Brahman. Whatever happens in the real world or in the mithya world, it is only Nama Rupa which is changing. But Brahman doesn't change.
This is like that saying, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, in fact, the fact that pot is not there means what? Pot thought is not there. That's why. If the pot thought has to be there, you will be cognizing the pot.
Yeah.
And therefore, he is talking about two things. The permanent nature of existence, satyatvam, and the non-permanent nature of nama rupa, mithyatvam. All this was conveyed in a much more technical language, where in Shankara Bhashyam on which verse of Bhagavad Gita? 16th verse of the second chapter. Second chapter. Okay. Now here what has happened is, we have started from the product, from the karyam, and travelled backwards to the karanam. Okay. Now Shankara in his commentary is not satisfied. So he says, okay, it's possible that, I was not clear enough. So let us take the reverse. So now he starts from the karanam, and now he will travel to the karyam. Starting from the karanam and going to the karyam is what? Creation. Srishti vicharaha. Okay. So he comes up with an assumption. In Sanskrit we call it abhyupetyavada. An argument starting with an assumption. Assumption is to be there, then only can you argue. And therefore this assumption is called the abhyupetyavada. What is assumption? Let us assume that Brahman is asat. Asat means what? Not existing. Let us assume that Brahman does not exist. So he's trying to say why such an assumption cannot be made. Because what did we say first? Brahman exists is the main point of Shraddha. If somebody wants to argue that you should not do that, he says, okay, fine, let us assume that Brahman is asat. Now Brahman is asat means what? The cause of the universe, Jagat Karanam, is asat. So Jagat Karanam is asat. Now what is the rule? Karana gunaha karye anuvartante. Which means what? Whatever are the attributes of the Karanam must be found in the Karyam. Okay. Now you are saying that Brahman is asat. What is the attribute of the Karanam? Na asti. Nasti. Non-existence. Okay. If non-existence is the attribute of Brahman, then that non-existence should be found in all its products. Because Brahman is the ultimate cause of all products. And therefore, if you have a glass in front of you, what should you actually be saying? If Brahman is asat, when you are referring to the glass in front of you, what should be saying?
Glass is non-existent?
The glass is not there. I am not experiencing any glass. So he says, similarly, if there is no Mula Karanam for the Jagat, no primary cause for the Jagat, then the entire universe is going to be pervaded by what? By Asat. If Brahman is Asat, the whole world is pervaded by non-existence only. And everybody would have grasped everything as non-existent. Does it make sense? The only thing you can say is nothing exists. Because today you can say something exists, because Brahman, being the nature of existence, pervades everything. And that's why we say Brahman lends existence to everything. But if Brahman is the nature of non-existence, then that same all-pervading Brahman, that non-existence has to pervade everything, which will mean that nothing will exist. And therefore, the only thing we can say is nothing exists, which is not what you say, which is not your experience, because for your experience, something exists. So he says that particular, idea that Brahman does not exist leads to this sort of a ridiculous conclusion. You should also note that here, one of the very rare mantras where Brahman is being defined as existence. Normally, we define Brahman as consciousness principle. This is one of the very few places in the Upanishad where it is defined as existence. There are even rarer instances where Brahman is defined as Ananda. For example, in Taittiriya Upanishad. Whenever we talk about Brahman as Sat or Ananda, we should apply the same 5 features which we have applied to Brahman as consciousness. What is that? Not part, not property, not product. All those 5 features one should apply. When you do that to all the 3, I suggest you do that as homework. When you do that to all the 3, you will find that there is no difference between Sat, Chit and Ananda. Okay, and that's only by the way. So he says, what is the actual experience? Everything exists. Your actual experience is that everything actually exists. And therefore, he says, the idea that Brahman does not exist cannot be logically supported. Brahman has to be understood as existence only. So, Atma asti eva upalabdhaya. That Atma, it exists. So, second part of the mantra is what? Asti iti, that exists. And then you can have a question, why should I insist that Brahman exists? And then Shankara says that this astitva, the insistence that a seeker should have faith, should have provisional faith that Brahman exists is necessary, because he says only the one who says that Brahma asti is a astika. Astika means he is the follower of the Shastric teaching. He is a Vaidika. He is about Shraddha in the verses. And he says those who don't say this, for them there is no Atma, there is no creator, there is no Jagat Karanam. And for them, there is no truth, there is no inherent reality beyond the Jagat, beyond the Mithya Jagat. There is no inherent reality. And such people will say that when the Jagat is destroyed, it dissolves not into any Karanam, but it dissolves into Shunyam. So, iti manyamani, such people, they have all the wrong nations. And he says, such people, how can they possibly know Brahman in its real nature? So, that question is not really a question. He's saying that such people can never know the nature of Brahman. Okay. Any questions?
I have a question on the previous line.
Yes, please.
I understood how Brahman cannot be known. Na chakshu part I understood, and na vacha is okay, but can you explain na manasa again, please?
So the instrument in the mind, what does the mind do? It objectifies enough. any other object. So it sees something as an object. When the mind is there, mind is pramata, and you got a prameya. Right. So when you are using this term through manasa, Brahman cannot be known as an object. Intellectually, you cannot conceive of Brahman as something which I know. And that Kathopanishad says that in so many words. The one who says he knows does not know. And when you use that, the word know, normally the word know is a verb, right? That verb implies that there is a knower and there is a known object. So that is what is being negated over here. Through manasa, there is no known object because the knower himself is Brahman.
So we are negating we are saying Atma is aprameyam.
Yes. It is aprameyam basically because you are Atma. You cannot know yourself. Know in the sense of know as an object.
Yeah. But in the sense of aparoksha jnana, it is possible.
In the sense of aparoksha jnanam, it's only understanding. So the word knowledge is very often misunderstood. You know, like many people say that I know all about Brahman. Now I have to get darshan of Brahman. So I will do meditation. That's a very common outlook. That after having studied Shastram and knowing what Brahman is, now I have to sit in meditation and Brahman will come and say Tathastu. Here I am. That is what is being negated. You can never know Brahman as an object. It's only a pure understanding, cognitive process that this Brahman I am.
I think even Swami Dayananda ji has also said that Atma, just as Atma is not an object,
Yes.
Maya is also not a particular object. It is basically Atma and Brahman and Maya is your understanding of things.
Brahman, Maya, understanding of things. In fact, the reason why this is so difficult to get your teeth into is because it is the RC which is trying to understand the OC. The RC is trying to say that I am the OC. But the RC is always impermanent. RC is a temporary thing. And the temporary RC is trying to convince itself that no, I am the OC. Whenever we have difficulty understanding the concept of I as Brahman, this is the problem. Because you, the one trying to understand, is who? Is Jivatma. It is RC only.
Ravi, can I ask a question?
Yes, Nataraji.
Following your talk now about the relationship between Karanam and Karyam, could this be a reason to say the statement that Jagat is unreal is not a correct statement? Unreal meaning it has no existence. Jagat, the world has no existence.
Yeah, so when we talk about not being there, that abhava, as it is called Sanskrit, the absence, there are two types of absence. One is, absolute absence. And for that, we give the example of a rabbit's horn. The rabbit never has a horn. So whenever you refer to the rabbit's horn, it is something which has never been there and will never be there. So that is absolute absence. The other one is mithya, dependent reality. So that is Jagat because it is dependent upon Brahman for its existence. That is why we call it unreal. That English word is unreal, but the Sanskrit word is Jagan Mithya. Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya. Shankara doesn't use Jagan Abhava.
Abhava means non-existent.
Abhava means non-existence, and that non-existence, Asat basically. Asat is non-existence. Asat we divide into two portions. That one is the absolute Asat, and one is Asat which is dependent upon something else. Like the bangle. The bangle is Asat, but it is Mithya. It exists, you can see it, but it has no real existence because it is only the gold. It is only name and form.
Thank you.
Okay, so let us look at one more verse. We'll go to verse number 13. So he says, Upalabdhavyaha, Brahman is to be known. So there is, how should you know Brahman? Brahman is to be known. How? Iti eva asti. So that word breakup is in the first word. Asti iti eva upalabdhavyaha. So Brahman is to be known as existent. Firstly, you have to know Brahman as Brahman is, Brahman exists. And then Tattva Bhavena, then you have to know a Brahman as it really is. So he's making two statements. First, you have to understand, you have to take it in a provisional faith that Brahman exists when you start the study of the Veda. And then only can you arrive at the real nature of Brahman. Ubayoho. Out of these two, Tattva Bhavaha Upalabdhasya, the real nature of Brahman which has been known, iti eva asti, as always existing, prasidati. It reveals itself. There is no need to make a separate effort. That second part of Brahman, that I exist always, that revealed itself. And therefore, what the mantra is saying, that Brahman knowledge, Atma Jnanam, Brahma Jnanam, takes place in two distinct stages. One is Brahman exists, right? Asti iti, Brahman exists. Where do you get this? You get this from the Upanishad only. This is called faith in the Veda Pramanam. This knowledge that Brahman exists is direct knowledge or indirect knowledge? It is indirect knowledge of Brahman as an object. The moment you say Brahman exists, you are saying, I know that Brahman exists, which means I am the knower and Brahman is the known. I am the Pramata, Brahman is the Prameyam. That is the first stage. Brahman exists, and this is called Paroksha Jnana. Once having accepted that Brahman exists, then Shastra says, okay, fine. You now accept that Brahman exists. Now inquire into Brahman. And therefore, you inquire into Brahman to find out the veracity of the statement of the Veda that exists or not. When you do this, Upanishad redirects their attention from the outside world to the inside world, to yourself. And then you start that with what? Neti neti, negating all the observed objects. Until you come, like you negate the world, then you come to the body, you negate the body, you negate each kosha, until you come to a state where there is blankness. And when you come to the state that there is blankness, then you have to understand that blankness is not the final state. The very fact that you say there is blankness of mind means there is an observer of that blankness of mind. Blankness of mind is what? No thoughts. So the very fact that there are no thoughts means there is an observer of that state of no thoughts. And Veda says that observer, that is I. So Brahman is Paroksha Jnanam. I am Brahman is Aparoksha Jnanam. Without Paroksha Jnanam of Brahman is, you cannot possibly inquire into Brahman. Without accepting that something exists, you cannot inquire into that object. And therefore, Brahman exists is important. Paroksha Jnanam is important to make the inquiry. On the completion of the inquiry, you will come to Aparoksha Jnanam, which is I am Brahman. Aham Brahma Asmi. Therefore, without Paroksha Jnanam, you cannot come to Aparoksha Jnanam. Without Aparoksha Jnanam, Paroksha Jnanam is incomplete. And this mantra is very important because it is the very basis for the Sampradaya. What is the Sampradaya? Sampradaya is the way of revealing Brahman. The way of revealing Brahman is Adhyaropa Apavada, superimposition and negating. These are the two steps involved in the traditional method of revealing Brahman. You superimpose the universe you then negate the entire universe. What remains is Brahman. So Adhyaropa, accepting the existence of the Jagat, of the universe, saying Jagat is product, saying Jagat is Karyam, then introduce Brahman as Karanam. Right? This is Asti Jnanam. Second portion is Apavada. Negate the Jagat, the Karya Prapancha. Once the Karya Prapancha, the product is negated, once the effect is negated, there is no cause. Because cause and effect are relative word terms. So when you negate Karya Prapancha through Apavada, Karana Prapancha ceases to be a Karanam. Why? Because Karyam is not there. And therefore that very same Brahman, which was the Jagat Karanam, now becomes Karya Karana Vilakshana. It becomes separate. It becomes independent of both cause and effect. And in this mantra, that is what is meant by Tattva Bhava. The understanding that there is a Brahman, but there is no Karyam. And since there is no Karyam, there is no Karanam also. And therefore, Brahman has no association either with the world as a product or with the world as the cause of the world. Right. This is the net result, the net understanding from this particular mantra. A product does not exist separate from its cause. And at the time of the negation, when the Karya Prapancha, the whole universe is negated, then Atma loses its tag of creator or the cause of the universe, and therefore it is avikriya, it says. Karya Karana Vilakshana. So Vikaraya Karyam. Vikara means Karyam, Karya means product. And therefore, at the time of the Apavada, at the time of the negation, the status of Brahman is what? Free from upadhis. Free from upadhi means free from status as Karanam also. This status of the universe as a product of Brahman is called a lingam. So those who have done TTC, ATTC would remember the word Tathastha Lakshanam. The Jagat is useful as an indicator to reveal Brahman as the cause. But that is the superimposition. That is the superimposition part, Adhyaropa part. You have to go to the next step. You have to negate the Jagat as actually existing. Once you do that, you will find that Brahman is there, but Brahman does not exist as a Karanam or a Karyam. And therefore this Sat and Asat, Satyam and Mithya, remember these are only from the viewpoint of the Jivatma, from the Vyavaharika Drishti. From the Paramarthika, the absolute level, there are no words which can describe Brahman. And that is why in some of the Upanishads, Brahman is said to be Amatra. Amatra means the space between the matras, silence. And this is the real nature of Brahman. It is in this manner, he says, that Atma has to be understood. Okay. So there's one more question. So far, the mantra has said that Brahman has to be understood as Karanam. First as Saguna Brahman. And then after negating the universe, that Saguna Brahman loses the Saguna status. And it becomes Karya, Karana, Vilakshana. So question is, this understanding of Saguna Brahman and Nirguna Brahman, should it be simultaneous or should it be sequential? See, all the commentators say that the teachings start with Karana Brahman, Saguna Brahman. Then alone you can come to Nirguna Brahman. So first you have to start with Saguna Brahman. That is why he says Brahman is. Having having accepted that Brahman is, having accepted that Saguna Ishvara is, then you inquire into Saguna Ishvara, and then you come to the knowledge that really speaking, all the Saguna part is Mithya only. There is only one Brahman, which is Nirguna, and that Brahman I am. So that, then of course, Shankaraya in his commentary gives a lot of Shruti supports, which I am not getting into. It simply says that for the Jnani, it is not that having understood that Saguna Brahman is Mithya, it is not that he becomes free of bhakti. He continues with devotion. Bhakti, the devotion will continue in the Vyavaharika Satyam. At the Paramarthika level, the Jnani knows that only he as Nirguna Brahman exists, nothing else exists. With this, the main teaching is over of the Upanishad. The next 2-3 mantras, they deal with the Jnana Phalam. So you can have a choice, either you wait for next class, or if you all can wait for half an hour more, we can finish it off.
I can stay, sir, for half an hour. I would prefer.
I don't know. Ask everybody else.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So, the last point, which we were discussing about the stepwise, or rather we progress from Saguna Ishvara, accepting Saguna Ishvara to Nirguna Ishvara, which is similar to the other point that we start with Brahman as Paroksha Jnanam and then progress to Aparoksha Jnanam. So, coming to the previous line that I was asking, the na manasa, na vacha, na. So there also, actually speaking, we do need Upanishads to tell us. We do need the Jnanendriya, at least Shrotrendriya, to listen to those words, and we do need the mind to process. So at least as a first step, these are required. But is it saying that the last, as in even having these three together, it is still not Brahman Upalabdhi?
Yes. If you remember the discussion in Mundaka Upanishad, we said that everything, including the Upanishads, they are what? Paravidya, Aparavidya, they are all Aparavidya.
Apara.
So the Paravidya is your understanding that I am Brahman. That alone, that vritti alone is Paravidya. That vritti cannot come without Aparavidya. That I accept. But that vritti alone, which says I am Brahman, that alone is Paravidya. Everything else is Aparavidya. That is why Navacha Namasa.
But as a step one, these things are required.
Yes, of course.
And as a step two, we drop them.
Exactly. See, the Saguna Ishvara is a must. Because Nirguna Ishvara is not available otherwise than through Saguna. Consciousness for you is available always in association with the Aram. It is never available without Aram.
Acharya, it's like a question somebody asked today, that if I am Brahman, then where is the need to do anything?
And that's a common misunderstanding, because Brahman anyway, it is not doing anything. It cannot do anything.
Yeah.
And that is to be understood. So it is, that understanding that, I don't, a dismissal, so to speak, or a disrespect also almost towards Maya is what is actually very unnecessary, because it is not that. It is
not that. You have, see that without Maya, there is no question of coming to Brahman. And therefore, when one climbs up a ladder and reaches the top of the ladder, one doesn't disrespect all these steps, right? Right. They are what brought you there in the first place.
Yeah. So the negation is also through an understanding really of what it is, and what is its purpose, and what are its functions, and what is it made of, and what for, and how can I use it, because it is there for now.
So all of you all are jnanis at the moment, but the hardest point is not getting the jnana. The hardest point is getting the jnana nishtha. Because jnana nishtha is going to overcome thousands of years of conditioning which you have in you. All those vasanas, all those samskaras, all those have to be negated, overcome with nididhyasana. And that's why somebody said that jnanam is no big deal, Nididhyasanam, God knows how many lifetimes.
Acharya, I have a question, if I may ask.
Please.
So, for example, in the case of, somebody like a Raman Maharshi, who did not, I don't really know much about him, but from what little I know, he did not have a Shrotriya Brahmanishta guru, for example, and this was something that, it's mystically explained.
Yeah.
So does one understand that in his case, it is just, it's a result of his previous Shravan Manan Nididhyasana?
Absolutely, absolutely. The only thing is, because in this life, he did not go through the process of being taught, you can't consider him as a, Shrotriya Brahmanishta. He's a Brahmanishta, all right. Shrotriya means the one who knows the sampradaya, the technique of apavada and adhyaropa. That is the sampradaya. That can be taught. And if you've seen in our own teachings, we never teach it as such. It is always to be picked up from the teaching. How we are superimposing the world, how we are negating the world. In every class only that is done. In every text that is done. That is how we pick up that this is the sampradaya. That if you have to explain Brahman, you can only explain through first superimposing something, then taking it away.
Thank you, Acharya.
Okay, so with this we'll stop. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for your patience.
Om Tat Sat, Acharya. Thank you, Acharya.